Hey, Parks Casino is number one casino in Pennsylvania, where they've got it all, including an impressive collection of restaurants. You can enjoy Parks Grill Steakhouse, Liberty Bell Gastropub and Open Air Beer Garden, Bamboo Noodle House, Chicky and Pete's, all right there at Parks Casino Plus, state-of-the-art sportsbook, the 360 bar with live bands and comedy and headline entertainment at the Excite Center. Visit parkscasino.com for all the details. Time now for headlines from Smerconish.com, the newsletter. Let me mention at the outset that there's a special feature that we've introduced today, both at Smerconish.com and in the newsletter, with so many primary races across the country for the Senate and gubernatorial mansions. Our friends at Ground News have developed something called the Election Tracker, which helps you see how midterm candidates are being covered by the media and how the coverage is impacting each race. For example, have you seen this, TC?
Yeah, it is. I've been all over this website, and it is so interesting to me, not only to see how many stories are written about each candidate, but from what side, bias side of the media, the right or the left, those stories are coming from.
Right. So by way of illustration, I can click on any state in the country. And of course, I click initially on Pennsylvania.
Where's it going to be?
So in terms of the Senate race, John Fetterman's coverage, the Democratic nominee, has come 65% from the left, 31% from the center, and a fraction of the coverage has come from the right. When you compare that to Dr. Oz's coverage has come 48% from the left, 41% from the right, 11% in the center. Now, what do we make of that, though?
Fascinating. Does that mean that the right, the conservative media is just ignoring Fetterman?
Yes.
I mean, that's what it looks like.
Yes.
If we don't talk about him, then maybe,
the coverage that Oz is getting from the left is not favorable coverage.
No, but they're covering. I'm fascinated by this. And I think a lot of the coverage about John Fetterman probably has to do with his health at this point. No doubt. So that's interesting as well.
Anyway, check that out. Also, thank you to those who voted yesterday. We set a record.
We did.
For weekday voting at Smerconish.com. When I'm on CNN on Saturday and promoting the survey results or the survey question on Smerconish.com, we get 30, we have 30,000 people vote on Saturday. We've been averaging somewhere in the 9 to 10,000 range weekdays, except yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
Yesterday, against the backdrop of day 2 of the January 6th hearing, I asked this: did Donald Trump assert that the 2020 election was stolen while knowing that claim to be false? This got into a whole discussion that I had with Randall Eliason, who's a lecturer at the George Washington University Law School, former federal prosecutor. We were talking about the requisite intent that Trump would need to have for there to be a prosecution for some fraud-related conspiracy. 95.05% of the 16,129 who voted said yes, he made those assertions while knowing that the claim was false. As to the issue or question of whether anyone at Justice is paying attention, the answer to that is also yes. Attorney General Merrick Garland, this story is posted at Smerconish.com as well from NPR, is watching the House hearings on the lead up to and day of January 6th, as are the Justice Department lawyers prosecuting the cases related to the attack on the Capitol. He said, I'm watching and I will be watching all the hearings, although I may not be able to watch all of it live, but I'll be sure that I will be watching all of that. And said Garland, I can assure you that the January 6th prosecutors are watching all of the hearings as well. Today happens to be former President Trump's birthday. Did you know that?
I actually did not know that.
How old do you think he is?
How old is he? 75.
76.
76. All right.
76 Close. Trombones.
So
for his 76th birthday, and I've published this, of course, at Smerconish.com as well, not a news story about it, but instead I am putting on the website and in the newsletter his actual statement, because there have now been 2 hearings. A lot of people are paying attention. 20 million watched the first one. They're creating quite a buzz. Interesting that Fox News at night, totally different than the coverage of Fox News during the day. Although I went to Fox News yesterday. Do you remember what time this was? Because I sent you an email. I feel it was like 6 p.m.-ish. And I'm looked
thinking
at,
that's about right.
I looked at every one of the news stories posted on the website at Fox News. None of them had to do with January 6th or the hearing. None of them at the time I looked yesterday, which was really pretty stunning.
4:37 p.m.
Okay, 4:37, a little bit later than
you
I thought. 4:37 p.m., I sent TC a note, remind me, because I'm not seeing anything, which that goes to the whole ground news and media bias, right? That would be an illustration of the sort of thing that they do. Anyway, to be fair to Donald Trump, I have published his entire statement at Smerconish.com. He calls this a kangaroo court. I'll give you the first paragraph. Our nation is suffering, all caps. Our economy is in the gutter. Inflation rampant, gas prices have reached an all-time high, ships unable to unload cargo, families cannot get needed baby formula. We are an embarrassment around the world. Our withdrawal from Afghanistan was a disaster that cost us precious American blood and gave $85 billion worth of the best military equipment on earth to our enemy. Millions of illegals are marching to the border and invading our country. We have a White House in shambles, with Democrats just this week declaring Biden is unfit to run for re-election. And what is the Democratic Congress focused on? A kangaroo court, hoping to distract the American people from the great pain they are experiencing. Substantively, if there's any substance in this, because it's a lot of hyperbole, but in terms of you're watching this narrative, they're making a convincing argument, I think, as to the fact that there was no fraud. There was no fraud of any significance. Everybody around Trump knew there was no fraud. Everyone around Trump told Trump that there was no fraud, and he persisted in his claim, so-called big lie. Well, does he back off any of it in the statement? Absolutely not. Democrats created the narrative of January 6th to distract from the much larger and more important truth. The more important truth being that the 2020 election was rigged and stolen. And he goes on just with a whole litany of charges. And then, regurgitates, for example, that on the morning of November 4th, the day after the election, I led by 700,000 votes in Pennsylvania, 300,000 in Michigan. Well, yeah, but as we learned in the testimony yesterday, everybody around him advised him about the red mirage and blue wave, where he had discouraged so many people from voting absentee in the Republican Party or by written ballot, mail-in ballot, more accurately said, the votes that were then going to be counted after Election Day were going to be Democratic votes. That's exactly what happened. There was no surprise in it. He also talks about the mules, which I think is a reference to Dinesh D'Souza's movie, which yesterday Bill Barr audibly laughed at. The former Attorney General, Donald Trump's Attorney General. So I've published it. You can take a look at it. It's about a 10-page long document with footnotes. That is Trump's response. TC, how much did I pay you when on the American Life in Columns tour, you would often introduce me to audiences around the country? I'm starting to think you were woefully underpaid.
Was so underpaid. I had no idea that this was the going rate. I talked for more than 2.5 minutes. I prepared. There were jokes. There were laugh lines. I am really horrified by this. And I think that there's some, I just think you need to catch up is what I'm saying to you.
Kimberly Guilfoyle, formerly Kimberly Guilfoyle Newsom, was paid $60,000 for a 2.5-minute speech that she delivered on January 6th. Now, how was she paid? Where did that money come from? That money came from, it was raised from Trump supporters who believed that they were funding an operation to challenge the vote. Well, frankly, I think it's highly unusual. I think it's subject to criticism. I don't think it's illegal because she did speak, and she was speaking at an event that was designed to challenge the vote. So it's defensible from a legal standpoint, but holy smokes. What I'm waiting to see, because the Trump campaign, and we learned this yesterday as well, this may be the most compelling part of all about the misbehavior of Trump and his supporters after January 6th. What did they do with the money that was raised by people in the immediate aftermath of the election who were on Trump's side and fit to be tied because they thought the election had been stolen. Trump's campaign collected $250 million from supporters in the aftermath of the election. $250 million. How much of that money was spent? I mean, how much of that money was not spent on Kimberly Guilfoyle's speech, but was spent in a way totally unrelated? And will any of those people step forward and file a legal action and say, hey, wait a minute, I gave $50 and here's how it was used? Keep your eye on that. I think that that's a significant issue. For parity, because I'm trying to be fair and present all sides, you know that I think Jack Del Rio, the defensive coordinator for the Washington Commanders, should not have been fined $100,000. Greg Cote from the Miami Herald, a sports writer, wrote a piece and said he's lucky he still has a job. So the total opposite of the way I view that case, but I published it today at Smerconish.com so that you would have the flip side of the coin. Also, January 6th related, a story from politicspa.com. You know the name Doug Mastriano. Doug Mastriano is the Republican nominee for governor in Pennsylvania. Strong Trump guy, was there January 6th. I think he was responsible for chartering buses. He has now hired Jenna Ellis as a senior legal advisor to his campaign. If the name is familiar, it's because along with Rudy Giuliani, she was the public face of the Trump campaign effort to overturn the 2020 election. So instead of running from that subject, Mastriano embraces it. I mean, I'll bet he'll hire Rudy next.
Sidney Powell?
Sidney Powell, if she's available. January 6th is the story of the day because of yesterday's hearing, but so too is the economy, and none of that is pleasant. The Fed is likely considering a 0.75 percentage point, 3/4 of a point raise this week when they have a get-together, so intended to stem the wildfire of inflation. The Fed raised rates by 0.5 percentage point at its meeting last month. That didn't do the job. That was the first such increase since the year 2000 to a range between 0.75 and 1%. When did the Fed last raise rates by 0.75 percentage point? That would have been 1994. 1994. I also recommend a story from the BBC posted at Smerconish.com today, consequently in the newsletter. Why is inflation in the United States higher than anywhere around the globe? And it is. The explanation offered here, high demand driven by the spending in the U.S. by the government to shield households and businesses from the economic shock of the pandemic. So all of those programs that were implemented here in the immediate aftermath of the onset of COVID-19, the funding for businesses, the funding for individuals, the enhanced unemployment benefit, that they argue, the economists argue, has created a demand that is not equaled elsewhere in the world because they didn't have the same type of handouts. Ukraine, cannot let it fade from our consciousness. A good NBC story on a subject that I've talked about before. 6 current and former government officials briefed on what would be the United States and or NATO response if Putin were to use nukes to, say, obliterate a Ukrainian city. Bottom line of this analysis, Ken Delanian and others wrote it. We don't have a plan. We don't have a plan. Hey, do you remember the football coach? I talked about him because this case about to be decided by the Supreme Court of the United States. Washington State high school football coach who had a habit of praying on the field with players, with coaches, with community people if they so desired. And he said, look, I'm just, praying. And if they choose, there's nothing I've done to bring that on. That case about to be decided by the Supreme Court of the United States. His name is Joe Kennedy. So Sports Illustrated has a major story about this. I'm embarrassed to tell you, do they still publish? I don't even know if you can still
it's funny
buy
that you
a
asked
copy
that
on the
because
stand.
I've seen it says the daily cover.
Yeah.
But is that something that's only online? I bet it's only online if I had to guess. But the daily cover looks like the cover of a real magazine.
Such a big deal when I was a kid, like to get a copy of Sports Illustrated,
especially the swimsuit issue.
They had this was before the swimsuit issue.
What?
They had a little column, Faces in the Crowd.
Seriously?
And
oh my gosh, you've liked characters this whole time.
Huh?
Like, that's so you.
Well, faces in the crowd would be like up and comers. And I remember at one time there was someone from my area, I don't know who it was, who made faces
it was
in
a
the crowd.
huge deal.
It was a big deal.
That's really cool.
Anyway, so they have a story, we'll call it a cover story,
Yes,
about the coach from Washington State who would pray at the 50-yard line. I talked about it here extensively, and he lost his job. The tweet said, SCOTUS will soon rule on the case of a public school football coach who wants to pray on field after games. The expected result, a win for the coach, Kennedy, and an erosion of bedrock American democracy. Some people upset about Sports Illustrated saying that a win for the coach would be an erosion of American democracy. My take on the coach was, if he wanted to just stand there and pray, he could have stood there and prayed, but he did it with fanfare and this is my take, wanted to make himself central. And what I said when we talked about this, TC, is what if I'm Jewish and I'm on the team? What if I'm Muslim? What if I'm agnostic? I'm going to feel like, and this comes from me, number 3 on the quarterback depth chart. I might sink to number 4 on the depth chart. Or 5 if I don't go pray with coach.
Well, and I think the fact that he's bringing this all the way up to the Supreme Court proves you right. In other words, if all he wanted to do was say a prayer on the sidelines and not be the center of the tension, it wouldn't have gone this far to begin with.
You know the name James Patterson?
I do.
Guest here on the program
Friend
recently.
Of
the most. How do I say this?
Prolific,
but
successful?
Prolific is that he writes a lot. He sells more books than anybody on the planet.
Successful.
Okay. All right. James,
the most successful novelist in the world.
I think that's a fair statement. And he has a brand new book. It's a memoir.
Yes.
I'm halfway through it, which is why this story jumped out at me. He trended on Twitter yesterday for all the wrong reasons.
Oh, dear.
He published over 200 books. He sold over 400 million copies. He lambasted the alleged difficulty that white male writers are now having getting jobs, a sentiment which landed him in hot water online. Quote, it's just another form of racism, he said. What's that all about? Can you get a job? Yes, it's harder. Yes, it's even harder for older writers. You don't meet many 52-year-old white males. I happen to believe, maybe inartfully stated, but I know of what he's speaking, and I believe there is truth to it.
Does he mean white male characters?
Well, I mean, Alex Cross, his most famous character, like, Nelson DeMille has John Corey. James Patterson has Alex Cross. Alex Cross is a black man. So it's not the characters. He's saying, I think, that if you're a 50-something white writer today, it's hard to get ahead. I could tell you my own story of a treatment that I had circulating recently in Hollywood that came back completely unrecognizable to me because everybody was diverse and woke. So I understand, I think, what he's saying. And one more, if I may, a story today that I'm spending time on elsewhere in the program, but it's about a Seattle police officer who now is being paid $1.5 million, I think is the title. Yeah, $1.5 million to go away. In other words, this guy is an assistant chief who put an insignia on his door. Picture a door that has the name of the officer and some type of an emblem or insignia above it. I didn't recognize what it is, but it's the insignia of high-ranking Nazi SS officials. He said that he knew it was German, but he didn't know that it was Nazi. Anyway, he was initially disciplined. For 2 weeks without pay. Okay. I think it cost him $7,000. Do the math. He makes like $200,000 a year. Okay. Then there was a hue and cry in the community. So now they came back and they want him out, but it would be double jeopardy according to their rules if they disciplined him a second time. So to get him out the door, they had to negotiate with him. His opening demand was $3 million. They settled on 1.5. So now in Seattle, it's a huge story about the cop who hung the SS affiliated insignia that they've paid $1.5 million to leave. The story's at Smerconish.com. And the website question today The survey of the day question, I'm getting tongue-tied.
Wow.
The
survey question
of the day, are more young people actually gender diverse than a generation ago? A new analysis says yes. The lead author on today's program, I'm asking, are more young people actually gender diverse than was the case a generation ago? Go vote at Smerconish.com on that survey question. Cannot wait to see the result. Thank you for listening, watching on YouTube. Hope you're subscribed to the newsletter. See you tomorrow.